Welcome to the Legion Strength and Conditioning Podcast. You can check us out at legionsc.com or follow us on Instagram at legion.sc. So something that comes up often in training is, athlete steps into the gym, not feeling so great, not feeling so hot. And they look at their program. Well, they've already looked at their program. They know what they're doing. And it's something heavy. It's like maybe something even a little bit unpleasant as well, like a heavy 5-rep max back squat, right? Like that sort of sucks to do. And not feeling so hot. Should you do it? Should you push through? Should you do what is written on your True Coach, on your iPhone notes app, on your blog post programming? And that's a question a lot of people have to deal with regularly, right? And so not just this specific question, but the bigger picture of how should we react to our specific training program, and how should we think about potentially modifying stuff based upon that? So, John, with this person who comes in, they're supposed to squat heavy. Should they do it?
I mean, I think there has to be a lot of kind of self-realization about where you're at for that day. So if you have like a 1-rep max program for the day and you had
5-rep max.
Night, 5-rep max, you had a bad night's sleep, you're feeling sore from the previous day because you decided to do some extracurricular squatting after your session, something like that. It's oftentimes, I think when people are going for maxes, there's such a mental aspect to it. Whether it's feeling good going for that PR or worried that you're not going to have improved since the last time you tested, that if you're not feeling 100%, it can be pretty damaging to try and go for a 5-rep max. My advice to people there would always be to take it to a heavy 5 for the day, and not be as concerned about what that number is. So base that more off feel, and can you hit something that's maybe 90% of the previous 5-rep max, and kind of be okay with it. Because some people aren't okay with it and they need to learn to be okay with it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, what do you mean by like not okay with it?
Well, they have, if someone's coming in to test a 5-rep max, they've done a lot of squatting over the last 6 weeks and they feel good. They think they can PR, but they wake up on the day and they're not feeling it. Maybe their hips are tight. Their lower back's a little bit achy, and they go into the gym, they try and hit a 5-rep max, and then they just get really disheartened when they can't PR. And, they're 20 pounds off a previous test and it's already a grind. And, people have this kind of expectation that every day should be perfect in the gym. And every time they are lifting or testing pieces that they should be improving. But the reality is you're not 100% every day.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I think that we've talked about this several times on the podcast in the past, but a lot of athletes and coaches don't have a great understanding of how much variability is normal, right? So like you said, they can see something that feels like it's out of the range of where they should be, and really take that to heart as an evaluation of where they're at in a way that's just not appropriate. It's like, hey, even if everything is going extremely well, the range of performances that are possible for you, given your current ability, is bigger than you think it is. So it's really going to be okay, right? But I do think that the value of pushing through when things aren't going well can also depend a lot on what a person is trying to do and where they're at in their season for whatever they're trying to do, right? So, a lot of the people who listen to this podcast are competitors, are coaches of competitors, are former competitors, but a lot of people who have some understanding of like, okay, I'm trying to improve my fitness as much as possible in order to do well against other people, right? And if you are in that position and you're at a phase of your training where you're coming up on a specific event that you need to prepare for, like that's the type of situation where it may actually be valuable to just say, you know what, you're going to have to deal with unpleasant scenarios where you don't feel good, where you feel sore, like you mentioned, John, like, yeah, guess what? The way this event is structured, event 1 involved 400 jumping switch lunges, and now you have to do like a 5-rep max back squat for event 3, right? Like that can happen. And so there is value, I think, specifically leading into certain kinds of events of just doing stuff and pushing through it so you can experience the adversity of doing something like that, and that you don't kind of like freak out if and when things are not going well, right? But then, John, to your point, on the flip side of that, it's like, okay, well, what if we're not in that scenario? What if we're someone who potentially is going to, get really upset about not hitting numbers that were expected? Then that's another kind of situation where you need to pull back a little bit. So I think a big question to ask in terms of like, should I push through this discomfort? Should I do something that doesn't feel good today? Is, well, what do I actually want out of this session? Do I want to maximize the training stimulus on my cells and tissue, given my current state of recovery for today? Or do I want to practice a scenario of things going wrong so that I become more adaptable to future scenarios where things are going wrong? Right. And like, there isn't a right answer, but those would be maybe the two main things I would consider. I don't know.
Yeah, one thing we've started doing in my gym, we have a competitive training group. And right now they're doing some test workouts. And on a Friday, they're doing a test workout as the first thing of the session. And then they're going in some lifting pieces after that. And part of the reason is so they're fresh for the tests, so they haven't done lifting right before you. And then the other part of it is working on lifting under fatigue, and kind of replicating that competitive environment where, yeah, sometimes you have to do some heavy barbell cycling, or you have to do a max effort lift, 30 minutes after you've done a Metcon in competition. And understanding how your body reacts after that and what kind of percentage range changes for you if you're doing a max effort. So if you have to do a 1-rep max snatch after doing a 20-minute AMRAP and you get a short rest, what is a realistic percentage for you to hit as a 1-rep max of your, lifetime max? And there's a lot of benefit to that as an athlete, but also benefit to us as coaches to be able to see that kind of, I guess, reaction to fatigue. And, maybe lifting technique changes. Maybe compensation comes up that you haven't seen before when they've been lifting fresh, because, 90% of the strength work we do is the first part of a session. I think that's common for most people, and is, for the most part, the best way to do it if we're looking to get stronger. But when we're looking at that competition setting, knowing how you react under fatigue, and, if you've done a day of competition beforehand and you're sore, and day 1 had a lot of squat volume and day 2 involves a max squat clean, well, you've got to know how your body responds and what levels of ability you have in that situation.
Yeah, John, I think it might even be useful to slightly differentiate this idea of lifting while fatigued as kind of like a sport-specific skill from just not feeling good and deciding whether or not to do your training, right? Because I think that we've been sort of talking about both of them simultaneously. And as we both mentioned, in the sport of CrossFit, it's very clear that lifting heavy in a fatigue state is going to show up in the test in some form or another, right? Whether it's an open workout where it's like, do a bunch of stupid burpees and then do a heavy clean complex. And you're like, oh, geez, like that sounds bad, right? Or it's just a short turnaround time between events. And so very clearly, anyone who is an athlete who's looking to compete in the sport of CrossFit has to be prepared to do heavy Olympic lifts while they're tired, So as coaches, we need to create scenarios to do that. And we would look at that just the same as we would look at creating scenarios for, a soccer player to take a shot like off balance or something. It's like, like you have to do that in a game. Like you're not just going to be able to tee it up every time. So, I think of that very, very similarly. If we are thinking about not just creating these fatigue-based scenarios, but deciding whether or not it's appropriate to push through in training when things are not going well? You know, how would you think about that?
I mean, something that we do in our group classes at my gym is normally when there's a lifting piece, there's a percentage range that we're shooting for. So let's say this week we had some low hang power snatches, and we gave a range of 70 to 80% for all the working sets, on the understanding that if you're feeling good and if your like body's feeling good and your energy levels are good and everything's kind of lining up, 80% for sets of 3 there is manageable and repeatable. For some people, 70% is going to be tough, and they don't need to build from there. They just need to work in that range. So in our group classes, we do give that range. For individual things, I do sometimes vary where I will give people build to a heavy 3 for the day. And there's no set expectation there. This is a 3 rep max. It's just hit a tough triple for that day. And one day that might be a 300-pound weight. One day it might be a 315. Just depending on how everything's aligning for you that day. Muscle fatigue from previous training sessions, your sleep, your stress levels at work or life, all of the things that play into how you feel in the gym are then going to help you dictate what weight you're moving for that day.
All right, I don't know if you guys are with me, but I'll just say it. Anyway, I think if you are looking to, we're looking at this obviously from the aspect of someone who is, this lag is amazing. This literally is like 2 tin cans and a piece of string from Spain to America. But anyway, so essentially, getting back to the point, if you have someone who's trying to develop their strength and is, say, sort of in that beginner to intermediate phase, then obviously pushing through and trying to go heavy. Oh my God. But obviously pushing through is not going to be a good thing to do in terms of developing your strength. So you're probably going to be pulling back a little bit more. But then if you are an advanced athlete and you are someone who is trying to compete in the sport, it's essential for you to be practicing those elements. And as people develop you could say the application of pushing through and going heavier becomes a little bit more relevant for them. And it also becomes a little bit more, you could say, it becomes more of an okay thing to do from a training perspective as well, because they're not necessarily in as much of a developmental stage. So as those gains start to slow down, and as you could say your training exposures of going heavy sort of increase, and the rate of adaptation session to session, week to week, month to month, as that decreases, going heavier whilst you are fatigued is something that can actually be done because the body's a little bit more used to the movements, the motor patterns, etc. But as well as that, it might be something that might be more specific now to your training, because that is something that's going to be required in the sport. So if you're in more of a developmental stage, you're probably not going to be going as heavy and pushing through. But if you're looking to perform and you're looking at getting stuck into the sport on a more competitive level, then obviously the application of going heavier becomes a little bit more relevant in terms of your training goals, but it also becomes a little bit more of an okay thing to do as well in terms of you progressing in your training. I think I'm probably about 2 minutes behind the conversation, so there might have been a load of points that I missed off there. But I'm just going to pause and yeah.
Luke, I think you did great. Just sort of, flying in from taking your little time travel from whatever your lag time differential is, and just landing amidst the conversation. It was perfect. I loved it. But I do think that some of the stuff that you said is really, really relevant there, right? I mean, it's the experience level of the athlete and like what the goal of the training session is. And it reminded me of, I think, the On Coaching podcast with Steve Magnus and John Marcus, who are track coaches and cross country coaches. And one of the things that they talk about especially with running, where, basically all your workouts are running, is most workouts have some sort of like time frame and pace or whatever, right? And this is a thing that comes up often for track athletes is, should I push through and try to hit this pace if it feels super, super hard, even if it's not supposed to be hard? If I'm not able to hit my paces, should I just terminate my intervals early and go home? Should I rest longer and try to restart? Right. So in track or like rowing or whatever, where you don't have a lot of different modalities and you just have to show up and basically do the same thing every day, there's this constant iteration of like, okay, what do I need to do to potentially get through the session? Should I just scrap it? Whatever. And one of the things that they mentioned that I think is really, really important is the idea of thinking about, is the goal to feel a specific pace in a training session, or is the goal to get like a specific stimulus on the body? Right? Because if the goal is like, hey, listen, like you have this meet coming up and you know that you need to be running your 400s at roughly this pace to get the time that you want to get, and we want you to feel that pace and get used to it, like, it doesn't matter how it feels to run that pace. You just got to do it and see what happens. Because that's the point of the training session, is holding a specific pace and seeing what happens. Whereas other times the goal is to develop a certain aspect of the aerobic system. And if you're supposed to be running, at whatever pace and it's supposed to feel somewhat easy and it feels super, super hard, it's like, well, okay, this is not actually giving you the adaptation that we want. So we need to change the workout to target the adaptation. So I think that the idea is similar when thinking about like lifting heavy or doing, a difficult CrossFit workout or whatever, where if the goal is to feel a certain competitive intensity, regardless of how you as an individual are feeling coming into the training session, like, yeah, you got to just do it. But if the goal is to create a certain type of adaptation, then potentially we need to think about adjusting the training session based upon that, right? Which becomes particularly relevant for people who aren't already advanced, because for them, we're trying to build them up to the level where they can, in fact, start to deal with some of these more nuanced types of things.
And I do kind of have a fallback option for people if they're really struggling on a specific day, and even warm-ups for light lifting don't feel good. My kind of go-to is just the longer aerobic piece. And often it's going to be beneficial from a training standpoint to work on longer aerobics. So you think 40 to 60 minutes continuous work. But also it might help with recovery or, encouraging blood flow, breathing in the body to allow you then to recover better, so that the next day's training is more on track with what you're used to, and being able to hit stuff when you're feeling a little better. So it's okay sometimes to just completely ditch a training session and do something different, if that allows you to be in a better state the next day. Because I do often see people who kind of chase good days and it just turns into a week of bad workouts. And, they get in on Monday, they don't feel good. So they kind of push through. They still try and lift heavy. They still try and get it done. And then the next day, well, they still don't feel any better because they pushed too hard the day before. And it's kind of a perpetual cycle of, okay, you just need to take a couple of easy days, get your body reset, and then you can get back into doing more meaningful training.
Yeah. What do you mean by chase good days? I think that's an insightful point. I'm not sure I fully understood what you meant.
Yeah. I mean, people can have a bad day in the gym and they think, oh, it was just a bad day, tomorrow's going to be better. But if they've pushed too hard on a bad day, they don't feel any better the next day. And so they think, well, I can't have 2 bad training sessions in a day, I'd better push through. And then the next day they feel bad as well. Whereas, taking that step back, taking a couple of easy days, doing some aerobic work, getting some extra rest, overall is going to allow you to have a better training week than if you just try and keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've seen this a few times as well, where there's this sort of sense that like everything is conspiring against me, and if I could only have a good day, then everything would be good. And I just need to like not be unlucky and just be able to string together good days. But all this stuff happened to me. Like I couldn't sleep last night, or like my kids did XYZ, or my elbow's bothering me. Like it's conspiring against me to prevent me from having the good days that I need to get to the spot that I want to get to. Right. And that's like a really, really insidious, dangerous attitude to have. because that stuff is just happening to everyone all the time, right? Everyone is always dealing with that. And the people who are, you know, more, let's say, unreactive to that kind of stuff and just sort of show up and get done what needs to get done and modify what needs to be modified and swap their days around. So they're doing moderate intensity rowing intervals instead of a 5-rep max back squat when they feel like trash. Like, those are the people who are going to have better long-term results than, like you said, John, the people who are just like really chasing, like, oh my God, I need to have a good day. You know,
It's the same people that you see fail a PR snatch attempt 5 times, 6 times in a row. And they're like, oh, it's almost there. I just need to do this one thing. It's like, okay, you've missed 5 times. Let's just call it for today. That's all right. You don't need to keep chasing that PR.
but didn't you see that one video of John North failing a snatch 18 times in a row and he got it on the 19th time?
Yeah.
If I quit early, never quit, John.
And one thing I will mention that people seem to forget, if you're doing a max effort lift, like a snatch or a clean, and you keep like missing it or not quite standing it up, this kind of thing, you've still done like 90% of that rep. Like, it's not like a miss counts as 0 work. You do 5 efforts at a PR and you keep like not quite getting it perfect in the catch. Well, you've done most of the work of that snatch for a PR. So it's okay. Just take it easy.
Yeah. Right. I mean, if we sort of reduce that to just what is the stimulus on the body of having done those attempts, right? It's like, well, you know, you still contracted your muscles hard enough to put that barbell over your head X number of times, right? So you'd managed to get some training stimulus out of your, you know, just missed PR attempts.
Yeah.
That is actually something that I think would benefit people to think about. Like, okay, like I did get the physical work done. You know, even if I didn't perfectly stand it up, it's okay.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. So, I mean, I think that overall, you know, the balance here really depends on, like Luke said in his time traveled
Monologue
insertion into the conversation, right? The training stage of the athlete, and then, you know, really just like, what are we trying to accomplish here? Are we trying to accomplish some sort of physical adaptation, or are we trying to accomplish some sort of sport specific adaptation, or are we trying to accomplish some sort of just like mental ability to deal with things not going well? You know, and depending on the exact balance of all of those things, whether or not it's appropriate to push through, like, of course, depends. But you know, the decision making process is going to come down to those things, and I think that a good coach or an athlete who has a decent amount of training experience, like, they're making those judgment calls, whether or not they're explicitly saying those exact things. But I think that's kind of like what goes into that decision. Thanks for listening. While you're here, go ahead and head over to your podcast player, subscribe to the show, give it a rating, give it a review, all that good stuff. You can also go ahead and click through to the show notes where you can find out more about us at legionsc.com, and also follow us on Instagram at legion.sc.